So I started the video illustration, and you can begin.
Yes. But we didn't receive the message, or it is okay that we don't receive, right? I don't know. Okay, let's start.
I received it, so probably not didn't because you are the initiator or something.
So did I.
So it might work without approving, right? What do you think?
Should be.
Yes. Okay. Good. Yes. Good evening, everyone. Distinguished guests, dear audience. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm greeting you warmly from the premises of the University of Göttingen, and I'm glad that you had time and interest to be with us. We are launching a new book written by Ukrainian historian Georgiy Kasianov, Memory Crash, Politics of History in and Around Ukraine, 1980s, 2010. Warm welcome, Georgiy Kasianov, who is a book author and who, thank you very much for agreeing to participate in this event. Our distinguished guest is Professor Anke Hilbrenner, who will also thank you for joining us, and who will reflect together with other participants in this event on the book's main topics and their significance for the perspective of from the perspective of recent past as well as the present. Why are we here? Why we have decided that this event is very important? Every book written by scholars is a result of effort, of a huge effort, I might say, especially books written on Ukraine today draw the attention of the public due to the situation in which Ukraine finds itself. I am referring, as you know, about Russia's war against Ukraine, which started almost a year ago, and which brought this country on the political scene and has driven the immense attention of the international public and academia. So the historians are among the professionals who try to respond to the growing demand on clarifying such important questions as historical roots of the war, how the current war should be understood with regard to the Russia-Ukraine relations, their interpretations. One of the central questions I receive, and I'm sure the professor from the audience, but also in private and in academic discussions, is how it came that the history is manipulated to such degree that it stays at the core of Russia's rhetoric and the war against Ukraine, and how Ukraine reacts to it, how Ukraine reacts to this instrumentalization of its past, yes. So the way Ukraine's past was and is instrumentalized is the topic of our today panel. Let me introduce briefly the guest speakers. Georgiy Kasianov is a professor at Marie Curie Skłodowska University in Lublin, Poland. Formerly, he was the head of the Department of Contemporary History and Politics at the Institute of Ukrainian History at the National Academy of Sciences in Kyiv. His research interests are the social, political, cultural history of Ukraine from the 19th to 20th centuries, epistemology of history, nationalism, Ukrainian and transnational politics of memory. Anke Hilbrenner is a professor of East European history at the Heinrich Heine University in Düsseldorf. Previously, she was professor of East European history at the University of Göttingen, and I'm sure many colleagues and students are happy to see her tonight. Her teaching and research areas range from the history of Russian terrorism to Jewish history and everyday life, Second World War, and more recently about cultural history of Zoo in Eastern Europe. You are warmly welcome. In the chat is a link to the book, which is available online to read. And before we start our discussion, I would like to mention that this event is organized in cooperation with the Göttingen Castle branch of Deutsche Gesellschaft für Osteuropakunde. So I will go into asking and moderating this discussion, and there will be several rounds of questions and answers from the part of our guests, and then we will have time to give floor to the audience, to those who participate in this event, to be able to also ask questions, but not only ask, but also reflect together with us on this very important and a lot discussed topic today. Yes, so I will refer to the author of the launch book, Georgiy Kasianov. We all had the possibility, not all of us, but still the guests and some colleagues from the audience had the possibility to read the book. Congratulations on this academic achievement. You start your research from the Middle Ages and bring the discussion about history politics to today. In one part, on one side, you write, I will quote, this is your book. You see it as an evolution of a genealogy of the phenomenon known as historical policy. So politics. So it's genealogy means you see it in evolution, you see it in progress, and you in certain interventions, also in your most recently written text, you compare the intensity which history politics achieved, or the intensity with which the past is used to achieve political means today, as well as military ends today, is you compare it with the eve of World War I and Second World War. So what we have in this book is a clarification of a mainstream narrative of history politics in Ukraine, and you talk about two major aspects. You talk about national, so-called nationalist narrative and Soviet nostalgic narrative, and those narratives in your book are not static, they are interacting, they are conflicting with each other, and it's seen as a main achievement of this book that you clarify this interaction and conflict in the last 3 decades. So would you be so kind and tell us more about this interaction and conflict, and also maybe about other narratives that you observed during the last 3 decades, and so how those evolved, what factors shaped them, what were the critical points which influenced this dynamic or influenced this genealogy of this phenomenon. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Just very briefly, thanks so much for arranging this book launch. It's in fact, it's the first book launch in the history of this book. So your question about two major mainstream narratives. Yes, it's correct that the book focuses on this, and I distinguished these two narratives just to present a complexity of the politics of history in Ukraine. And at the same time, I mentioned there, and it is mentioned in the book, that the the politics of history and memory politics in Ukraine, I distinguish these two notions. They, of course, we cannot reduce them just to these two mainstream narratives. There is a lot of other narratives, other national narratives, not just Ukrainian national narrative. There is a Russian, Jewish, Polish, and many other national narratives. We have a Holocaust narrative in several options, and we have regional narratives. And we have also we had imperial nostalgic narratives, and we have at least two. One is imperial nostalgic in its relation to Russian Empire, and one is to Habsburg's Empire. So the one which is related to Habsburg's Empire is still there, and it's quite fancy enterprise. Franz Joseph II is a kind of praised figure in certain regions of Ukraine. So this is really complex phenomenon, politics of history in Ukraine. There are regional dimensions, ethnic dimensions, cultural divisions, etc., etc. So these two mainstream narratives are in the center. Other narratives can somehow interact with these two narratives and then can influence it, or these two narratives can influence them. At this moment, after the beginning of the full-scale war, probably after 2013, but particularly after 2022, after February 2022, one of these narratives just, in fact, diminished. This is Soviet nostalgic narrative. So it started as a Soviet narrative in the beginning of the 90s, and then it's transformed into Soviet nostalgic narrative. And now, if you look at sociological polls, of course, it's understandable that sociological polls in the state of war should be considered very critically. And but anyway, well, we see that the territories which were quite prone to the Soviet nostalgic narratives are the territories of the warfare, and a lot of people moved from there. Some of these territories occupied, so it is now probably even not feasible to consider these territories or consider the Soviet nostalgic narrative something which can be presented as which is existing in this situation. And this means that, well, it does not mean that national narrative, I also distinguish between national narrative and nationalist narratives. So national narrative, definitely, it established itself in 30 years as a stream, as a central narrative in Ukrainian official politics of memory. And in the last, let's say, 8 years or 10 years, the nationalist narrative as a, let's say, extreme part of the national narrative also took a prevalence over all other narratives there. And this is conflictual part of Ukrainian politics of history, still conflictual. However, we see that after 2014, the nationalist narrative of memory was spreading over central Ukraine and to the east. And this was used by Putin in his instrumentalization of history and for justification of the aggression in terms of denazification of Ukraine. So he used certain part of Ukrainian historical politics and its implications, and turned this into the thesis which he instrumentalized as a casus belli. So this is why I believe that the analysis of politics of history in Ukraine is it is very important that this analysis should be considered not in isolation, not as a self-sufficient phenomena. It should be considered in interaction between between other narratives within Ukraine and outside Ukraine. So this is why in this book I also analyzed Ukrainian-Polish and Ukrainian-Russian relations and tried to compare the politics of memory in these countries with Ukrainian politics of memory. And I think that probably we should also then extend the perspective and probably consider Ukrainian politics of memory in the context of Central East European politics of memory, to which Ukrainian politics of memory is quite close. And also, of course, since Russia just went back to the ideas of Russia's Sonderweg, special path, and Russia's special mission, and Ruski Mir, Russian world. So, all these concepts were formulated in the end of 19th, beginning of 20th century. So they pretend to be a kind of separate entity of which Ukraine is a part. So then we should confront this to the politics of memory in Central Eastern Europe, in United Europe, transnational politics of memory in Europe, and then to see which modes of action are similar, which are different, and what are the actions what actions were and would be probably. I am not about prognostics, but using recent experience, we can try to do this. So which of them can be instrumentalized in the future?
Thank you very much for this presentation of the book, and including other aspects which I did not mention. I will refer to this transnational context because of course, as you mentioned, and you argue very well in your book that it is not possible to understand, to explain the Ukraine case in isolation, and I think it's available for every East European country, and especially those that were part of the Soviet Union and now are struggling with they are also explaining to themselves and to the other their past and commonalities and differences between those countries, and the relations with Russia, of course, is in focus. So I would like to refer to this transnational context, and in your book you talk about the fact that there are differences between history politics in Western and Eastern Europe, and this intersect, but still there is a dichotomy which needs to be clarified or to be known at least. So, for example, the fact that Western Europe has overcome its past conflict, but Eastern Europe and including Ukraine is avoiding, or has still not come to this point in which the past is overcome, is acknowledged, especially with relations to such important and also controversially discussed topics like World War II and Holocaust. So I would like to also pose my question to Georgiy and to Anke. What are the tendencies in debating, or what were the tendencies in debating the past in Germany? How could clarify or to help understand what are those differences? So is it the way Germany clarified its past, different in the way Eastern Europe sees this, and still, what are the commonalities? Do we see those commonalities in looking at past 30 years, let's say before February 24, because the question will come a little bit later. So can you please refer to those aspects? Thank you. Anke, if you want to.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Yes, of course, you asked the question how, for example, in Germany, the past is memorized on a political or public scale, and how this differs from Eastern Europe. And of course, the big difference is and must be that Germany is the perpetrator in this common history of World War II, and Eastern Europe, many Eastern European countries, and the Soviet Union were the victims of this war. And this is, I think, one, of course, decisive difference. But this leads also to this seemingly very clear juxtaposition also bears its inner conflicts. One very important content of European memory, and this has been already observed by many historians of memory, is the common commemoration of the Holocaust as one of the leading contents of European memory. I think a conflicting memory in Eastern Europe is the memory of being also a victim of the Soviet Union. And one example that can probably show this on a good example to show this is the conflicting memory of the Hitler-Stalin Pact, or of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Treaty, how it is remembered in Eastern Europe. And I think here we see very clearly how a different memory of World War II is remembered, and how much this also contributes to conflicts in our presence. When we probably think about the resolution of the European Union of September 2019, and Georgiy, you mentioned this in your book as well. Here we have the fact that this East European memory of being victim not only of Germany but also of the Soviet Union, symbolized in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Treaty, became vocalized on this European scale, and this immediately provoked, of course, conflicts also with Russia on one hand, and on the other hand, there were also critical voices raised in Western Europe.
Yeah, just the part of this agenda is that when we speak about transnational memory, generally, it is applied to the efforts undertaken by transnational institutions like Council of Europe or Euroclio or whatever. So we have some transnational projects like Holocaust memory, which became transnational, particularly in Europe. And then Russian project, how to call it? Some call it neo-imperial, some call it imperial nationalism, different definitions. But Russian project is also transnational in certain case. Of course, in the core, it has this idea which turned out in 2020, in the new edition of Russian Constitution, when they say that about Russian multinational people, but stressing the state-forming role of Russian people, ethnic Russian people, ethnic Russians. So, and if you look at the change in the demographic composition of Russian population will see that now it is about more than 82% ethnic Russians in Russia, which is very different from the situation in the beginning of 90s. So, this is not because Russian ethnic Russians, there are more ethnic Russians. It is because less other ethnic minorities in Russia. So, but in the core, this project is still transnational or supranational. It is imperialist. So this means that there might be different kinds of transnational, because generally we attribute some positive features to transnational projects as a uniting projects, etc. But if you compare transnational projects in Europe and transnational project of Russia, we see that that's very different things and aimed at very different targeting. So the Russian transnational project means assimilation or non-recognition of certain historical nations like Ukrainians. They just do not recognize the right of Ukrainians for existence as a separate entity. They believe that it is not just about Putin, it's about cultural, political elites. They believe that Ukrainians are part of big Russian nation. So they do not have agency, they do not have subjectivity, they're just part of Russians. And if you remember in the last meeting at Valdai Club, Fyodor Lukyanov asked Putin, so if they are not separate nations, Ukrainians, so we're dealing with a civil war, we're doing civil war there in Ukraine. And Putin said yes. So it's a kind of shift of everything, but probably it's just episode. So the denial of subjectivity of agency of certain nation is a part of transnational project. Or in Europe, in United Europe, transnational project does not mean denial of subjectivity of other constituents of this community. So two transnational projects, but just radically opposite. So, and if I have time to give a short comment on Germany, it's Germany. To many, Germany is a kind of very specific case of work with memory. So very intensive and I even read recently some article, I don't remember which one, that Historiker Streit is not over. So it's going on. So we have a third edition of Historiker Streit in Germany now. So it's really the process. And in Germany, so Germany now is in this one of the turns in German politics of history is that Germany has to respond to external claims, like recent Polish claim that Germany owes some money to Poland, and also based on historical arguments. And one of these external challenges was Ukrainian history, when Bundestag had to go on with this resolution on Holodomor. And so there were, as far as I understand, there were debates about this. But you see, that was Germany was quite, German politicians were not quite positive about this. But war changed the situation. globally and in Germany, and also impacts the politics of memory in Germany. I'm sure. I'm not specialist in this, but I feel it, and I can see that if Bundestag did it, so there were Germany, United Kingdom, and France from these heavyweights of the European Union. Well, UK is not in the European Union anymore, but there were heavyweights who did not accept the idea of recognition of Holodomor as genocide. So now one of these heavyweights is on. So the history of Ukraine and Ukrainian memory, already consider it in a very different way. I don't know what would be the consequences in institutional terms, more Ukrainian studies in Germany or more research centers paying attention to Ukraine. I don't know, but generally it is a real turn in the politics of memory. So it is also changing, and in the direction which I cannot evaluate at all.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will pick on this topic on Holodomor because it is a very important topic, and I'm glad you have mentioned the fact that recently, in fact, 30th of November, Bundestag has condemned Holodomor and declared as a genocide. And my question would be to both of you. On the one hand, I would like to draw the attention of the participants to the effects or significance of this resolution for German society. We know that there were debates, but see what has changed. What change might bring this resolution in relation to the Ukraine and Ukrainian history, and maybe in relation to Ukraine, Germany, or Ukraine, Eastern Europe, and for Georgiy, maybe some insight into whether history politics around Holodomor evolved in Ukraine, in which way it evolved during the 30 years of period. So it is now very much in front of the discussion, but or maybe of acknowledging Holodomor as the most important tragedy, if one might say this, significant tragedy of Ukrainian history and for Ukraine, and whether Russia at all ignores this. Are there any signs of common understanding of this tragedy? Whether you see some approaches that not only can be interpreted as denial, so to say, not taking responsibility for it, or you still see some differences in this approach?
Well, generally, there were the controversies between Ukraine and Russia over perception of Holodomor are still there, and they would never expire, because Russian side insists that that was the famine affected the whole Soviet Union, and the famine did not affect only Ukrainians, and it was not organized with the aim to kill Ukrainians and, well, to break them. So Ukrainian side insists, I mean, official version is that it was genocide. It was fixed in the law in 2006, the Holodomor as genocide. Moreover, as I mentioned already, and probably this article will be published in Germany, there were 14 attempts in Ukraine to criminalize the denial of Holodomor as genocide. And so this purely matter of of politics, the formulation of Holodomor as genocide. Of course, this formula now is it's just a must. So open every textbook of Ukrainian history, school textbook, and then you will see that Holodomor genocide formula. In the academia, it is a bit different. However, again, the mainstream there was during the 30 years that there was no premise that is it genocide or not. It was decided from the very beginning that it is genocide, and then all evidence, all factual basis, etc., was organized to prove that it was genocide. So in Western world, the discussions over Holodomor genocide or not are still open, but I think that scholars, the scholarship of Holodomor is expanding, and it goes beyond this formula. So it is not limited genocide or not genocide. Now it is, there is dozens of new research on Holodomor, very different aspects, the local aspects of Holodomor, ethnic aspects of different ethnic groups. Many of them were affected no less than Ukrainians in terms of percentage of people who died of hunger. So this is expanding area, and it goes beyond this formula. So I'm happy that finally scholars in the world, not just in Ukraine, looking at this problem and approaching this problem from very different angles, not limiting themselves only by Holodomor genocide. So it is now totally, this formula totally belongs to political realm, and definitely the Bundestag decision was definitely political decision, and definitely it was influenced by the genocidal practices of Russians in Ukraine. Of course, Bucha, Irpin, and Mariupol now in the air, and so the parallels between 30s and today are obvious. And of course, it is enhanced by the rhetorics of Putin and his entourage when they claim that there is no Ukrainians as a separate entity. So in combination, all these factors influenced the politicians to make this decision. But by the way, in Ukraine there was no triumphalist notions about this decision. So people just noted, those who are interested, that was decision of Bundestag, and that there were no this triumphalist comments. So finally Germany recognized, etc., etc. Just as an ordinary event, and as far as I remember, I translated this. I don't read German. I translated this from German into English, and I see that there are two formulas there: genocide and crime against humanity. So it is, in a sense, it's very pluralistic, because sometimes there were really sharp discussions about how to characterize it. So, for instance, I was not very big fan of genocide formula, because I believe that it is very political, and it politicized the issue, and in this case, and in this form, it limits the academic part of the problem. So Bundestag just showed a kind of pluralistic approach to the issue, whatever it would be, political or even more political. So in Ukraine itself, it's also, as I mentioned, the Holodomor genocide is a part of official narrative, and now it's about last poll, pre-war poll, showed that 82% of Ukrainians, of respondents, recognize Holodomor as genocide. So it is just what we call reality. We academicians, scholars, we can discuss it, we can propose alternative versions or alternative interpretations, speak about ethnocide or speak about sociocide or whatever. But at the level of the politics, at the level of at the level of school education, so now generations of Ukrainian citizens will grow up with this formula in their heads, and this is you can do nothing about this. You have just to accept it and to analyze it.
Thank you, Anke. If you want to continue.
Yes, thank you very much. Georgiy has already said rightly that, of course, the recognition of the Holodomor as genocide by the Bundestag was most clearly a political statement and not that much scientific or historiographical. And I would say that while the politicians were kind of, yes, also moved by, of course, the political events, the Russian war against Ukraine, to consider this motion and also to vote in favor of it with a very broad majority. I think the historians in Germany are a little more reluctant to make this evasion of Holodomor is considered as genocide. And I think this is also due to another fact that is probably that we haven't discussed yet, and this is because of the notion genocide itself was from the very beginning a very political term and didn't quite cover all events that could be mentioned with it because it was by Raphael Lemkin who coined this this term. It was designed to also gain political support, and therefore it is probably not as good as an analytical term could be. And I think, but as you said, also rightly, maybe it helps us to overcome the old questions about the Holodomor and look more for intentions, look also look also at the people involved on each sides, look for different ethnic groups who were probably involved or who were also affected by the famine. And therefore, I think maybe this political initiative can also help us at least discussing this term a little more. It's only very recently a book came out. It's more a handbook on Russian and Soviet history, and there it states very clearly the Holodomor is not a genocide but a sociocide, as you just also said. And only a couple of months after the book came out, this was this motion of the Bundestag really turned everything around. And I also think we should probably mention, with regard to this transnational question of memory and what might be also a potential conflict, that I think in Germany, the use of the word genocide was very much, not probably, I mean, genocide was very much used as the word for the Holocaust. And other genocides were under the suspicion that the use of the word would conflict with the singularity of the Holocaust. And therefore, this is also a reason why why the use of the word genocide in other contexts was until recently, yes, not very common in Germany. And after this motion of the Bundestag to condemn the Holodomor as genocide, there was also a motion to condemn the genocide of the Yaziden also as genocide. So I have the feeling that the whole notion of genocide and how it is used in politics is really we have an inflation of the term here, in at least in the political debate, and I wonder what this will mean for the scientific debate.
Thank you for this very generous insight into the term and also the way it is perceived and will be definitely discussed in the future. And the significance, of course, of this resolution is there is a general signal from the side of the political decision makers that Holodomor should be treated specifically as a tragedy of the Ukrainian people in connection with what Soviet regime did to Ukraine. So it was in the condition of the war, yes, so came quicker into being. Let's turn us to the reactions also because of the war inside Ukraine. We have observed, and it also was published in German media about the effects of the war, considering the Russian-Soviet monuments, the streets in Ukraine, the so-called decommunization campaign. So there are initiatives which question the necessity of those objects that remind us about the past, Ukraine's past inside or as part of Russia, or the part of Russian Empire, or as part of the Soviet Union. They put under question mark. But moreover, this decommunization campaigns means physical dismantlement of monuments and also renaming of streets. So I'd like to ask Georgiy to clarify for us how this takes place, and maybe what the reactions are there, but who takes the lead? Who are the actors who decide that a certain monument, a certain representation of past should be turned down, should be evicted from a certain place? And yes, what are the examples there? How can this phenomenon can be interpreted? And maybe to Anke briefly, whether you observe those phenomena in relations to histories, German history or history of other lands in a certain critical point, critical moments. Thank
you. According to the law, majority of monuments in localities is an area of responsibility of local authorities in Ukraine. According to another law on decommunization, law on the ban of the symbols of communist and Nazi totalitarian regimes, according to this law, the central authorities can demand the local authorities to remove all monuments or memorial places or memorial plates, etc. Those who can be considered as a monuments, as a symbols of communist totalitarian regime. You understand that there is no symbols of Nazi regime in Ukraine for obvious reasons since Soviet time. So this means that the emphasis of this law is about communist regime symbols. So there is a group of monuments which belongs to the register, the National Register of Historical Heritage. So in this case, local authorities do not have authority to remove them. But generally, now what the most recent decisions, for instance, to remove some monuments, for instance, monument to Vatutin from this register, now local authorities can remove his statue from the center of Kiev. In more general terms, the politics of decommunization was in fact politics of desovietization and of removing the exactly the Soviet nostalgic narrative from public space. In this term, it was quite successful. It's true, more than 50,000 names of streets were removed, Soviet names were removed, and about 3,000 monuments were removed, etc., etc. A lot of things was done, but generally it happened exactly. What was the ferment behind this policy? What pushed this policy? That was beginning of Russian-Ukrainian war in 2014. That was the major factor which just moved authorities or groups of interests or even general public to more intensive decommunization or desovietization and derussification. Now, in fact, what we call decommunization in Ukraine, now it turned into, let's say, two streams. One is derussification, which because now they're neither Leo Tolstoy nor Mikhail Bulgakov were not communists, definitely, but they became, or Pushkin, for instance. So they became targets for this politics, which is now called decolonization. So Ukraine, by certain segment of society, presented as a colony of Russian Empire, and then this is the politics. Removal of Pushkin is a decolonization. So definitely, again, if we look at sociological polls, and I don't trust sociological polls, as I already said, I don't trust sociological polls which are done in the war in the country which is under the war. Different reasons might be advanced to say that these sociological polls do not reflect real state of society. So, but these sociological polls say that the negative attitude towards Russian culture is growing. And once again, who is in charge? Mr. Putin, of course. And so, paradoxically, Putin and Russia became most active decommunizers and desovietizers of Ukraine than those internal actors who did it. They destroy Soviet industrial potential. They almost completely destroyed Soviet weaponry, which Ukraine inherited from the Soviet Union. So they did much more for elimination of Soviet narrative from Ukraine than internal decommunizers, paradoxically. So this means that Ukraine now, in these terms of saying goodbye to Soviet legacy, is very close to 0 point. So now it's not even Soviet legacy. Now it comes to imperial legacy. So this kitschy monument of Catherine II, which was erected in 2007, now is removed. Now just been removed from the square in Odessa, and so well, this is the good sign of let's say, reconsideration of the imperial past. Unfortunately, this reconsideration, it's just a political play. It's part of political agenda, but it has nothing to do with the academic scholarship and the role and the positions of academics, who are themselves now in a very bad position. Sometimes they don't have to think about, they do not have time to think about politics of history, decommunization. They have to think about how to survive.
Thank you. Anke?
Yes, thank you very much. I think two contexts come to my mind when I listen to you, Georgiy, and your account of the decommunization process in Ukraine. I think one is, and I don't know, maybe this is also intentional, is that by framing this process as a decolonization process, it goes hand in hand with I think, global and at least pan-European move against the markers of the colonial legacy in the European countries. For example, renaming or the motion to rename streets that were named after colonial generals, or, for example, in Belgium, the motion against the statues of King Leopold as a colonial ruler of Congo, and this is also I think the intention of addressing the imperial legacy in this post-colonial context. And this, of course, also arises some opposition, let's say, for example, in Germany, because they say, okay, we can't get rid of the Moltke Street or we cannot get rid of our Bismarck statues because they represent our history, and even if history is not it doesn't suit us anymore, then we still have to confront us with it. And then there is this other, I think there's a good argument against it. I mean, right after 1945, all the Adolf Hitler streets and places were also renamed, and it would be very strange for us if we would still have those places. So, of course, you can erect and remove monuments and name and rename streets according to and this probably also reflects the situation the society is in. And the other context, which I find especially also interesting, is that how many countries in Eastern Europe and also Germany, probably after the war, think again differently against the monuments of Soviet nostalgia, as you termed it, in Eastern Europe. I mean, especially the World War II monuments are or were a place of gathering of, for example, Russian-speaking communities on May 9th every year, and there are monuments of Red Army soldiers that are presented with flowers and everything. And we see, I think, a rising reluctancy to have those monuments in the public space and to allow this also this demonstrations of a loyalty to the Soviet past, and this raises quite some conflicts, for example, in Lithuania and Latvia with monuments that are actually devoted to the memory of World War II, but I think now perceived as monuments of Russian imperialism.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a very interesting point about the connection between the Ukrainian idea of decolonization and all European idea of decolonization. They are really connected in terms of terminology, but in terms of the content, they're quite different. Because only Russia consider it as a metropolis, but there are also some alternative visions that Ukraine was very active. Ukrainians, how we call them now, then they were subjects of empire. They were very active in building empire and in the building of empire's core. So probably Ukrainians could consider themselves as a metropolis in a relation to Russia or to Moscow. As to your point about the reconsideration, re-evaluation, reassessment of these symbols of liberation, as it's because they are symbols of liberation from Nazis. It is also interesting in terms of who is in charge, who made this, and Russia made this. They turned the Soviet cult of victory. They turned this cult of victory into cult of revanchism, and into the cult of fight with the evil West, and into the cult of aggression. So that was a cult of victory, of great victory over Nazism. Now this cult turned into cult of militarism and into the cult of aggression, because they in fact say that they go on with the unfinished case of the Second World War, of the Great Patriotic War, how they call it. So they still fight Great Patriotic War in Ukraine. So it just turned upside down, and it is now, and then it also influences the attitudes towards cult of the Soviet victory in Western Europe. Now, yes, of course, these monuments will be, of course, considered in the context of this new re-evaluation of the Great Patriotic War in Russia, which turned into very aggressive ideology. We can repeat, for instance, as they say it. Yeah, they can repeat.
Thank you very much for your thorough answers. Let's now slowly turn to the last round of questions from my side, from Russian obsession with the past and the myths towards the future, towards Ukraine future. In fact, the Ukraine's perspectives on prospects, and we know that Ukraine became a EU candidate shortly after the beginning of the war, and it is due to the war conditions it happened so quickly. We acknowledge this. At the same time, we understand that there are some issues that still need to be worked out. You mentioned the Holocaust as one problematic, and tomorrow is International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is commemorated widely and also in European countries. And in your book, you still make this contrast in which way, or still emphasize how important is Holocaust remembrance for European politics of memory. So this promotes common civic and moral values. This promotes tolerance. And I would like to ask you, Georgiy, and also Anke, if she wants to add something. How? So let's maybe reflect on what can be done, yes, to move forward as some of the conflictual situation related to politics, the history politics, and also to think about the effects some actors have on the society. What can be done also from the side of historians? By the way, there is a question already in the chat in which the role of historians is placed forward. So whether historians will be able to be part of this discussion and not only leave it for political agenda. Thank you.
Well, there is a lot of historians. I think that it's majority of historians, at least I can speak for Ukraine, that majority of historians are they're working in the field of so-called affirmative or didactic history, and which means that they serve political needs. And if we speak about historians who deal with analytical history, in fact, as scholarship, not servicing the power agenda. When I say power agenda, I mean also power of discourse. So the minority of them, of course, they are critical towards, that politics of history and academic scholarship, in certain cases, they're just incompatible. You cannot follow the political prescriptions of the tops in your historical writing, because you're dealing with analysis, and which means that you may put hypothesis, and then you work with hypothesis, and you look for evidence, etc., and you can confirm hypothesis or not confirm hypothesis. So this is out in the affirmative history and from didactical history. There you are dealing only with the prescriptions and with the prescribed scenarios. If you are and in this case, I would say that majority of Ukrainian historians working in this field, particularly now when they have to be mobilized against Russian aggression, against ideological aggression, against a hybrid war and psychological war, etc., etc. However, they are commissioned. So this history of Ukraine, for instance, Academy of Sciences, they just have commissions from the state to do this or that, which means that analytical function is quite limited now, not to mention their material conditions. So generally, if we speak about things like Holocaust, it's also, to a great extent, it also was prescribed, because the Holocaust Alliance is international interstate body. So they are doing politics. So it was top-down politics. And now, as I see, and not only I, but also a lot of other observers, we see that there is a kind of incompatibility with the global Holocaust as a global icon, as some kind of set of prescriptions or even civic cult, and scholarship. So a lot of things are occurring in the research of Holocaust, and quite often they contradict this official version of Holocaust, international Holocaust remembrance, which particularly in education, which are prescribed by politicians. And at the same time, we also see these Eastern European attitudes to Holocaust, to official version of Holocaust. At 2000s, they had to accept it as an entry ticket to European Union, and then there was a backslide, for instance, in Poland, in Lithuania, in Hungary, towards this dominant version of Holocaust. A Holocaust memory. And finally, within the Holocaust memory, we also see even within this dominant discourse, we see exclusivist version when it deals only with Jews and sometimes with Roma. And we see inclusivist version of Holocaust memory, which includes not just Jews and Roma, Sinti, but also prisoners of war, sexual minorities, etc., etc. So this is a continuing process, and it's including politics, and including teaching Holocaust, and including a research of it. So it is also expanding. And so if we talk about the future in terms of academic development, the only thing which is really now in terms of future, which really disturbs me, is that political discourse more and more dominates the scholarship. More and more scholars make choice for political discourse, for servicing certain political ideas, and less to scholarship and critical thinking. And this tendency is exacerbated by the war, not just in Ukraine, by the way, but worldwide. It's globally. And this is a real challenge to scholars, to academics, how to confront it. What should we do? We should not go to state bodies and say, we will propose you a policy paper and policy making. We should do something with scholarship. We should keep scholarship clean of politics as far as it's possible. I understand it's not fully possible 100%. That at least we have to resist this political pressure when politicians tell us how to learn, how to study, how to interpret, etc., etc. Unfortunately, it is an agenda now.
Thank you. Yes, if you want to add something, Anke?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Georgiy, for this last word. And I mean, you must be considered the expert here writing a book on history politics. And I think this there you clarify and I really found that very much to the point when you said that like this very notion of politics of history was in the very beginning very critical towards this this whole concept of Geschichtspolitik or history politics. I, as a historian that was socialized later on, didn't really realize this. I mean, so this is, I find, so I think this already shows how much this this politicization of historiography was already moving on and taking place long before the present war. And about what can we do, I think it is important to keep, I mean, to also reflect our concepts. Georgiy, you also already mentioned the new edition of the Historikerstreit. This collected volume is called Historikerstreit 2.0. But of course, it is a discussion reevaluating the ideas that were already discussed in the Historikerstreit in the 1980s. And now they are discussed again, and they of course touch on the topic of, for example, the Holocaust as and the singularity of the Holocaust in the context of colonial violence, as we know, and also in terms of who was victim of the Holocaust, as you already mentioned, more inclusive or exclusive definitions. And I think that those discussions about the Historikerstreit, about the singularity of the Holocaust, can be very useful because they show us how these concepts are changing, how the discussion of the 1980s really don't fit our needs, also as not only as politicians or as people, but also as scientists and historians anymore, because because our perceptions changed so much. And therefore, and new topics and also new groups and new scholarships and new historiographies are coming on the agenda. And of course, with the current war, also our world and our experiences change. So I think, for example, what is always discussed about the Holocaust is this concept of the multi-directional memory, for example, that the Holocaust is and other memories of suffering, for example, of victimhood, are emphatically combining each other and not ruling each other out by saying, well, this is the most important genocide, or this is the most important crime, but maybe this emphatic and perspective on the different on different crimes and violences on this grand historical scale can help us to understand each other. And what I found very interesting, for example, was also a new evaluation of the concept of the nation that you suggested tonight, Georgiy, because of course in the 19th century, nation was it was an anti-imperial and anti-colonial notion. And in the 20th century, it had a very bad reputation. And when we coin Eastern European countries, for example, nationalist, it is of course perceived very negatively, but maybe in the perspective of today's war, we really have to reevaluate also our perception of nation again.
Yes, thank you very much for this insightful discussion into the book topics, but also into the topics that draws our attention due to Russia's war against Ukraine. Let's now turn to our audience, and the participants, you are kindly asked to formulate questions, to also reflect on those topics that were addressed, but not only. Maybe you have some additional remarks or questions that might add to what we have said tonight, or what our guests reflected upon tonight, but also raise some other aspects which were not raised in this discussion. Please raise your hand so I can invite you to formulate a question if you want, or a reflection.
We already have several questions in the chat.
Yes, I see, but I wanted to, since someone who left, I wanted to first refer to people who are present. But if there are still thoughts about it, you partially, I think it's refers to Georgiy, yes, so Tatiana Vadutika, Ukrainian historian who was with us, but had to leave. So she refers to this reuse question of the reuse of post-war reuse of Soviet concepts in relations to the situation after the war. How shall we commemorate, as far as I understand? Yes, so the war, the cities as city heroes, or maybe formulate a different formulas. And of course, she refers to this aspect, which was quite good, explained and discussed about the role of historians. Can the historians propose other formulas, other questions, and whether they will be taken into account in which circumstances? I think it's reformulated a bit, but you still have the question also in the chat. Thank you.
Honestly speaking, I don't know what to say about how historians can do something. In fact, when I did my research for this book, I have a special section there about roles of historians in the politics of memory. So it is all there, and there are different forms of. Some of them can serve as a public intellectual. Some of them work for instance, during decommunization, they were working in renaming commissions, etc. There is a lot of different variants. So I'm trying not to be involved into this. I can only mention that in 2013, I, with two colleagues, we wrote analytical papers for Academy of Sciences, naively hoping that it will be somehow channeled to the decision makers. It was exactly about Russian-Ukrainian relations in the politics, in this field of politics of memory. And it was just they put this on the shelf. And when I review it, I see that there were some observations of weaponizing of the politics of memory by Russia. So it doesn't work in these terms. As to the question about the Soviet-style practices, well, it's unavoidable. We have this kind of path dependency. So yes, there is a kind of stream that we should have new hero cities, but under current condition, almost every Ukrainian city is a hero city because all they participate in war. There is no just one front line in Ukraine. It's the whole Ukraine now is a front line.
Thank you very much for this answer. Who else want to pose a question or to comment? I see here a comment of Maria Roda about the genocide, the topic which is politicized in the case of Polish-Ukrainian relations, and so the debate which might change its course due to the war. So war solves the issues or brings to the fore some issues which were maybe in the shadow and were not quite on the agenda of the society, as you mentioned, Georgiy. So the war brought into the question the street names and so on, but it was already present, this debate and this decommunization due to the Russian war, or due to 2014 events in which Russia acquired Crimea and started occupation of Donbass. So on the one hand, the war solves some issues, but or maybe launches the solving of those issues because the issues remain on the agenda. As you said, if there are on the political agenda only, it doesn't mean that these issues are solved, in fact, because the complexity is relates to what the specialists have to say, and due to the fact that they are part of defense now and have other things more important to do, including so the publications will come out a bit later and the reflections will come out a bit later. So it's still under a question mark. We cannot, let's say, we are optimistic, but we cannot evaluate exactly how one of the issues when will be solved, so to say. But what does it mean solving? as from a perspective of a historian, we need to acknowledge, in fact, the position of different actors, the position of different players who are important in bringing the message across to the society. And of course, it would be ideal if the historians will be able to participate in it. So this appearance of the issue and disappearance of it, I think it will still be visible as a problem. So I'm not sure whether Maria wants to comment more on this, or it was just a remark made in written form. Who else wants to say some?
Well, the question was about Polish-Ukrainian controversies over the genocide issue, and well, generally, I think that yes, the war in Ukraine now just put this on back, so that in fact, there is no time and not good time to discuss again the things about Volhynia, etc. I myself believe that Volhynian massacre was a genocide. It was a genocidal practice or ethnic cleansing, whatever. But it goes beyond. We can discuss it at academic level, but politicians should probably refrain from this. And politicians already done what they wanted to do. Their input to make this issue quite controversial is great. At the same time, I would like to remind you that at the beginning of the 2000s, there was a formula for giving and asking for forgiveness. So there are other politicians who tried to solve it on very, very plausible way. So in this case, I think that we should leave it for the past, and we should leave it in the past. And we have much more interesting and much more complex things to discuss with Poles and with Polish counterparts. And also, I would like to remind that there was no Polish-Ukrainian conflict over Volhynia or over other aspects. There was a conflict between certain political groups in societies. And in both cases, both groups wanted to represent themselves as speakers for whole society. But that was not whole society, neither in Ukraine nor in Poland. So always, as scholars, we have to admit that when we see these are discussions and controversies between certain political groups, certain groups of interest, they putting certain aims when they do this, and we should not be in this trap, catching this hook that this is Ukrainian-Polish controversy. It's not Ukrainian-Polish controversy. It's controversy between certain groups in societies.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. But well, I just wanted to emphasize that it was a political question because the Polish parliament was involved in it very much.
Absolutely.
So,
that was my point. That when Bundestag does it, it is politics. When Ukraine does not recognize Armenian genocide, it is politics because of Turkey. So when United States Congress did not recognize for years the Armenian genocide because they didn't want to spoil the relations with with NATO member, etc., etc. So that's pure politics. Well, the word "pure" in application to politics, it's a bit squeezy, but it's pure politics.
Thank you. Are there any other questions related to our discussion or not related? Yeah, so you are free to ask whether you want to add something or ask or specify. If there are not other questions, and Yeah, so I think already it's time to wrap up. Let's say after this intense discussion, I would like to thank you very much for participating. Especially to my thanks goes to the book author Georgiy Kasianov, and also the guest, the discussant Anke Hilbrenner, and also to the audience who listened attentively to this very interesting and also deeply thought insight into history, politics in and around Ukraine, as Georgiy Kasianov mentioned. I see, so people clapping, and I was very glad to moderate this discussion. Professor Martin Aust is excusing himself due to health reasons. He was not able to join us. Nevertheless, I think it was worth meeting us and reflecting on such important topics. And I'm sure those aspects will come to the fore of also societal reflection, but also will be the kind of historians. Historians have also right to not only to discuss, but also to reflect in written form about it. And we are looking forward to other contributions and books also from the side of yours, Georgiy, and other people who want to contribute. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the best in the future.
Thank you.